you could make an argument that your mom and pops across the country are being competed out of their little local markets here and there. But I think that's maybe not the right way to think about it. I think the way you should think about it is it's an opportunity for the mom and pops to step up their game and maybe become better and maybe position themselves to be bought by one of the private equity consolidators, or just continue independent, but just get better at what you do. You can't, no industry out there can just keep doing the same thing for decades and not expect change.
Welcome to another episode of the Waste Nexus podcast, joined today by Matt Hillin. He has been a long-term friend of Brian and I's, a lot of investment and financial background experience in the industry, and happy to have a conversation today, just talking about the industry in general. Brian, do you want to kick us off with some questions and discussion points? You want me to hop into some of the ideas I had?
Well, I think the first thing to highlight is thanks, Matt, for coming back. You are a second-time victim of being around us. Amazingly, you're willing to do it twice, which I appreciate. And Matt and I also met up at the Waste Expo in Vegas a couple years ago.
Right.
So if you recognize his voice, he was in the background on one of my videos from that. So
I didn't even know I was recorded.
Yeah. This is
Always
during
a
your
risk.
costume phase, Brian.
yeah. But yeah, Chuck, launch into what you want. If you've got topics, let's do it.
I've got some topics. So Matt, I've been just paying attention to, on one hand, all of this like massive run up in valuation that you see on like AI companies, all that kind of stuff, and just like how hyperbolic that is. And then really how consistent the waste industry is in its own little unique way of, we have these, large established players, they're after route density, hard asset kind of stuff. And the one thing that stood out to me looking through just, we had a wave of third party companies called, many call them brokers, doing big fundraising rounds and that kind of stuff. And that had some venture side to it. We've had some venture side to the software portion. That seems to have really kind of phased out now. You have some private equity interest, I think, in those. And just a really unique landscape in this market. I'm curious on what, you're seeing change or be the same there. Because what I've noticed is it has a much different, like this industry has a much different output for a small or medium-sized company trying to go through quick scale, because the established players with the most capital don't necessarily actually buy them. There's very rarely an acquisition by, one of those big 4 or 5 haulers of a technology platform. They'll usually buy something and start to use it. I think a good example of that might be like, I think it was 2017 or 18 with the recycling stuff. Waste Management deployed a lot of compology sensors at the time, but that wasn't quite the right shape for them. They ended up putting the cameras on the trucks and using that, right? And so it's pretty unique, I think, where on one hand, the market is very frothy on, we need more technology, we need more startups to solve these problems. But the waste industry is like a little bit differently aligned to accommodate that. And yeah, just curious what you're seeing either change in that regard or remain the same.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. I mean, the investor base in the private side of the industry, and probably somewhat in the public side, although, I'm less sort of in tune with maybe some of the specifics around that. But the investor base in the private side has definitely shifted, right? You mentioned waste brokerage as one example here, which, maybe some in the industry would like to call managed service providers to be a little bit more, sophisticated sounding and whatnot. But whichever one you want to call it, let's say, a decade ago, something like that, it was a pretty much less mature side of the industry, right? And you did see some money starting to flow into it. But this is also the era of, 0% interest rates. And money was flowing all over the place and trying to find those pockets where, for all the VC firms out there, that 1 in 10 or 1 in 50 or even 1 in 100 kind of unicorn would sprout, right? And it was very cheap, relatively speaking, from the cost of that capital for them to do that. And there's probably some moderate success here and there, but I think largely reality set in that, unlike a pure software play, when you're managing customers' waste services, even if you're not running trucks on the road or operating a transfer station or landfill or MRF or any other sort of physical assets. But even if you're just, managing services as a broker and making sure that customers' trash is picked up every day, you're dealing with service interruptions and weather disruptions and all this stuff all over the country. That's not a easily sort of Silicon Valley style scalable platform in a lot of ways, right? At least for their traditional thesis. So I think we've seen some retreat from that sort of hockey stick assumption on that growth profile, but it doesn't mean that the money has completely vanished. Certainly, other areas of the private capital space have stepped in, and notably, you mentioned already, private equity is becoming more and more of a player in the space. I think that's true on both the hard asset side and the asset light side of the industry, and I think in some ways it's good. It brings a little bit more sophistication to the industry. You can make an argument that your mom and pops across the country are being competed out of their little local markets here and there. But I think that's maybe not the right way to think about it. I think the way you should think about it is it's an opportunity for the mom and pops to step up their game and maybe become better and maybe position themselves to be bought by one of the private equity consolidators, or just continue independent, but just get better at what you do. You can't, no industry out there can just keep doing the same thing for decades and not expect change.
Yeah. I feel like I agree with a lot of that. I feel like the pattern will probably stay the same though, of those smaller providers getting their own density and then, being available for a roll up or acquisition for the bigger players to make route density plays with.
There's also an element that the vendors that are the smaller mom and pop style vendor, the big waste company sort of needs them to sell and then go back around the horn and come back out again as a new company, because that's a lot of the pipeline that the big companies buy. They're not
Right.
great at organic growth.
I think you're right, Brian. I mean, we see it all the time, right? We see it all the time. The really true serial entrepreneur in the industry starts up a hauling company in, I don't know, middle of nowhere, Iowa, builds it for 5 to 7 years, sells it. Maybe they move a couple hours south, to get out of their non-compete zone for 5 years, or wait out the non-compete sometimes. But we all know it that the big guys, the big 4 or 5 are, and then some of the smaller, emerging ones, the private equity backed ones. I mean, they're M&A machines these days, and they have been for quite a long time, frankly.
Yeah.
Right.
One thing I think is interesting in terms of just comparing this to other industries, today Ramp, which if you're not familiar with that, does a bunch of like credit card and financial tools and stuff like that for your company. Expense management might be the old term for it, but they do so much more than that. And they're a really good technology company in terms of what they can ship and the speed at which they can do things. They like more or less announced that they were going to do an accounting platform today, in addition to the spend management portion that they did. And I think that's just interesting to juxtapose with the waste industry, right? That's a somewhat newer entrant. They might be 5 or 10 years old at this point. Innovating their way up to now, likely compete more directly with the established Intuits and NetSuites and stuff like that. So that's an accounting industry vertical. But you compare that to the waste side, I think it's really hard for a smaller medium player to have that kind of innovative push, either as the supplier, a traditional hauler, or as a technology services provider. And it seems like a lot of that innovation kind of comes, in an early phase one to the waste hauling big 4, 5, and then is rebuilt inside that big 4 or 5 for their first party need.
I think you have to look at it from a customer's perspective too, frankly, not just the investor's perspective here. Because let's say, you know, DSQ, your waste service at your office. Well, I guess it might be managed by your property manager, but let's assume that you manage it yourself, right? Or you decide yourself.
Brian and I have a pickup truck. We love to feel like we're playing role playing garbage.
I'm out.
There you, but if you're with one of your local haulers for many years and they provide reliable service here and there, and okay, maybe every once in a while you have a slightly overfull bin that you've put out, but on average, you're fairly putting out your bin with whatever kind of capacity, and you're being fairly charged. And then one of the other bigs comes in and having acquired them and taking over your account, and then they start surcharging you all the time with these automated, overage charges, and frankly, a lot of false positives are in the mix on that technology, and that's a bad customer experience right there. Technology is great, and you can improve service, reliability, certain things around tracking and automated notifications if your truck's going to be late that day or not coming that day for a breakdown or something, which is all improving the customer experience. But that's an example you laid out where it's kind of quite the opposite, in my opinion.
Right.
It's interesting. The customer experience is highly dependent on what the customer's seeking, in my experience. Like the customer who needs those kind of sophisticated tools for reporting for large networks of properties, they're going to go with a bigger provider because they have a more comprehensive uh, software and service solution, right? Whereas when you go with a independent, smaller group, you might not have the same tooling to support that large network of properties. But that's the interesting part as well when you start to then say, okay, how does the managed service brokerage model fit in? Well, sometimes they overlay that delivery of that service of technology and consolidation on top of that independent network profile. So it's to me, it's sort of like squeezing jello, right? Every time you push on this thing, it pops out a different direction. And everybody loves to have, their different little thing that they pick on. But having been watching this now for 15 years, it hasn't really changed overall to me, right? It's still the same. Well, there's benefits here, there's trade-offs there. Which one are you picking?
Right.
What makes me
Right.
laugh about what you're saying, Matt, is in many ways the feature for the smaller provider is the fact that it's still like, okay, one or two line items on your bill, pretty consistent monthly charge.
Right.
Keeping it simple is the differentiator on that side. Which I mean, obviously I agree with for some of my backstory and Brian's with helping people achieve that. But um, my fascination with the photos and stuff like that is simply how good some of these companies are at introducing new revenue streams and margin expansion, which ultimately I think is good for the whole ecosystem because it's a rising tide type of thing. But
Well, it is. It's
Yeah.
also a challenge, though, of how do you have to look at it from a regulatory and a human behavior management side, because if you're the big regulatory focus company and you're getting told you have to do these criteria to meet these things, you have to provide this service, well, that service is not as profitable as the regulator might think it is.
Mhm.
So then, how do you change human behavior? Humans don't generally change their behavior unless at the end of a pointed stick, basically, is what it comes to, or at the end of a dollar, right? And so
Right.
it's that's why I call it like squeezing jello, because no matter which company you are in the matrix here, you're ending up on some end of a regulatory consumer behavior uh, process that you have to say, okay, how how do I make this work so that we're profitable? Because ultimately, these companies are designed to generate a profit for the shareholders and the owner, right? It's different. It's a little bit distant from the shareholder, the profit element, right? Because it's a piece of stock you own in a multi uh, stock portfolio. But when you're the owner of the company, yeah,
Right.
you see it.
Right. Right. I think that's absolutely right. And I mean, we've seen plenty of states implement EPR programs and other sorts similar schemes. Some better than others. I'm not anti EPR necessarily, but I think there's a lot of problematic ones out there.
Toronto, is
Uh,
it Toronto that's doing one right now? Gerald Grant was just here telling me about it. They're
yeah.
having trouble with theirs.
Right. Right. And we're early stages in Colorado. I have a client in Colorado right now who's going through that process, and I think he's navigating it well, frankly, as a small business owner. Right. But in general, the big guys are going to be better positioned to compete in that environment. And there's a trade-off, right? The larger you get, the more sophisticated you get, the more, frankly, lobbyists you can hire to sit in DC and the different state capitals around the country.
Yeah, to
The
understand
better,
what's coming down the pipe, right? So you can plan.
and not only that, you're going to be able to massage the regulations in your favor during their creation.
No, that never
And
happens. You made that up.
it never happens, right? It never happens. Absolutely. Commercial waste zoning in New York City, another interesting example. Some some great things you can say about it and some problematic things you can say about it in terms of the implementation and some other issues. But the goal was, I think, largely admirable. Get, put fewer trucks on the road, make it safer, more efficient as an industry. Um, Regulation has a place, and it's all about
Yeah.
making sure it's well implemented, and hopefully having politicians and regulators that are open to hearing feedback, and not just from the commercial side of the industry, but also from the from the constituents and other
Did you see in New
stakeholders.
York they put bins on the street finally?
I know it sounded like a wildly new technology and innovation that they announced. I think Mayor Adams, the former mayor, had some big press conference about it a year or two ago, a couple years ago. Pretty funny.
Yeah.
I guess they're kept with the rest of the world here.
Yeah. No, let's not have the trash just laying on the ground. Okay. Good
But
start.
yep. Absolutely.
Matt, any take on how long the waste industry is going to be able to continue to see a pretty steady, I would describe it, increase in like core price, um, whether you measure it quarter over quarter, year over year. I feel like that's been a growing compounding effect for them from, and obviously being core price net of, sorry, without, energy or fuel fees. When Brian and I started in this, I think that number was closer to 3%. Today it's brushing up against 7 on, open market commercial accounts. When you
And
blend
fuel,
it, I
and
think it goes down to 6, but
in today's environment, fuel's bumping up against 50%.
well, yeah, but this is the core price, right? That then
I
fuel is applied
understand.
on top of.
Right. It's another line item in the waste hauler budget and another line item on the bill type of mentality. Those two
Yeah.
things dramatically changed.
And I guess just to give you my take on that, Matt, because it's a surprise question, but um, I feel like that core price kind of lags other spend categories. I think there's a pretty famous chart of like, stuff that has gone down in price and stuff that has gone up in price over the last 30 years. And it's like TVs and, other things have really gone down um, relative to stuff like healthcare and, other items have gone, dramatically up. And I feel like waste does a really good job of just threading that needle of, 6, 7, 8% core price increases, net of rollbacks. And they continue to just kind of bump that up 15, 20 basis points every year consistently. But, just curious on what you think the outlook there would be or things that would impact it.
Well, I mean, I'm maybe the first to admit here, I'm certainly no macroeconomist, and I've already played, regulation expert, which I'm not neither of that as well. But I think it really comes down to the scarcity of the assets, right? Well, it's two. I would say it's two big drivers, at least on the on the industry side of it, ignoring the regulation side, although it's certainly tied into regulations. But it's really scarcity of the assets and consolidation here, right? So on the scarcity of the assets, you can look at certain parts of the country, New England, to some extent California, probably some other states as well, where sort of a combination of regulation and just land availability has reduced the availability of
Hmm.
disposal, right? And so you're going to naturally see it's a simple, supply demand equation there, right? You're going to naturally see prices for disposal go up significantly, and then that's going to trickle down throughout the entire value chain of the industry, right? And there's look, I'm not going to say I know the solution to this, but it definitely involves the regulators, and it involves also, I think, technology and other innovative ways to maybe reduce the amount being landfilled and going to maybe more beneficial reuse kind of outlets, or in some cases being literally packed onto a train and shipped to the southeast US or wherever, right? But and then on consolidation side, I mean, obviously the fewer competitors you have in the market, again, supply demand here, the higher your pricing is going to get. I mean, we talked about consolidation earlier here. That trend continues, although you certainly do see more and more anti-competitive sort of pressure from the DOJ or FTC in in this space, and that's going to be somewhat administration dependent, I suppose. But there's a limit, right? And there's a limit to how consolidated the industry can get. And I wonder, I don't know the answer to this. It's just an open question. I wonder, you know, at what percentage of that 100% limit we've kind of reached at this point. Is it 6%, 8%, 95%? I'm not really sure.
I,
So
I,
if I'm a
I would
if I'm a
think that
lower middle market company looking at how I'm going to like plan my next 5 to 10 years. where do you think that sweet spot is in terms of like enterprise value? Because I feel like there's for waste management to do a deal or any of these big companies to do a deal, it needs to be worth their time, right? They can't go gobbling up $1 million ARR companies type of thing. To your point on the regulatory side, they also can't necessarily go swallow multi-billion-dollar whales once a year. How do you think that impacts sort of the landscape for some of these growing waste hauling companies in particular?
Yeah. Well, first I'll say for those small to mid-sized companies, you can compete against the big guys and you can win. I think a lot of them know that, but I think also a lot of them are kind of scared sometimes, right? I met some owners who were just kind of in their little lane and niche, and they never, for whatever reason, maybe wanted to aggressively grow, which is fine. But I think there's opportunity there around the country to grow. In terms of ideal size, there's no universal answer to that. You mentioned antitrust, that doesn't really come into play until you're in the ballpark of 150 million of revenue, give or take. I don't know the exact HSR number right now off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But look, if you build a hauling, and ideally, frankly, if you have the opportunity to build a transfer station these days or a MRF that's in a prime location, do it. Take
Yeah.
advantage of the opportunity and go after it. And but nonetheless, if you have a hauler or hauling and transfer, disposal, recycling kind of vertically integrated operation, if you've got 10 million revenue, 20, 30 million of revenue, you're going to be in a great position. You're not going to be getting, you know, probably at least, and there's exceptions to the rule, you're probably not going to be getting those double digit headline multiples you read about in the news. When I say double digit multiple, I mean off of your
Yeah,
EBITDA. But you're probably going to have a really good shot at getting the upper single digit multiple range, right? 6, 7, 8, even 9x is not unheard of. A lot of people ask me, what's my company worth? Well, that's a really difficult question to answer and a lot of nuance to that. So I'm not going to start spewing out a multiple that applies across the board. But absolutely, if you've got some scale and sophistication, and really importantly for individual business owners, a hierarchy of management and process and procedure embedded in your organization to where when you leave, or if you were to leave, the company still functions and runs on a day-to-day basis. That's so important, because if, Brian, you're running a trash company and you want to retire and you're trying to sell it, and if you walk away and suddenly it falls apart, well, obviously a buyer doesn't want to buy that, or they're going to buy it at a smaller price. And frankly, that gap is pretty big. Probably at least, in a lot of cases, a couple turns of EBITDA is not unheard of to see the value of that.
Or they won't buy it at all.
Well, they won't buy it at all. Absolutely. So anyway, I think there's great opportunity, and if you can grow, into the tens of millions of revenue with a solid, again, it's going to depend on your business and your local market, but a solid, 20 to 30% EBITDA margin, with reasonable, fleet age and things like that, you're going to be in a great position.
I think, Charlie, if you look at the history of what GFL's been doing the last few years, that gives you an idea of sort of a large player who is also buying into the marketplace, buying different pieces of the market. That their strategy is different than the other vendors, and it is applicable for everybody paying attention from the small end up, saying, okay, who's willing to buy me? They have a sort of land and expand type of mentality, it seems like, where they focus on places where they have a little bit of capacity and they grow from there.
Mhm.
So that allows them to grow in a way that the regulators don't get upset. They're competing in a market where they're not the biggest player. It's interesting to watch.
Right.
Matt, one thing that I wanted is to have, and we're going to run out of time at some point. What do you see in terms of the technology role in what you're seeing for M&A valuation? You and I have talked about that a little bit, but there's a lot of this out there. Does it make a material difference in what someone's willing to pay for a company? You mentioned a little bit of it earlier, if they have good systems. What do you touch on that, if you would?
And look, there's always exceptions to the rule, but I think in general, there's not a lot of value add for a homegrown, in-house built from scratch sort of system for most players in the industry. There can be exceptions around that for ones that have maybe a bit more scale and sophistication in general, and that maybe are eyeing to be acquired by private equity as a platform to build off of from there and not sell to a strategic buyer directly, at least initially. But generally speaking, I think your capital, both your monetary fiscal capital as well as your staff or resource allocation capital is going to be better spent focusing on your operations, on your customers, reinvesting into other areas of growth. Because the off the shelf or semi custom sort of solutions out there pretty much cover what you're going to need. If you're running a fleet of trucks, if you're operating a transfer station to track loads and volumes and pricing, and or even if you're brokers, I mean, I'm talking to the best software guys in that side of the industry right here, right? So you guys understand that the solutions are out there, and it's a matter of implementing it efficiently and effectively, and then focusing on kind of being the best in class of what you do as your core competency day over day. And if you're a waste hauler, I'm sorry, but your core competency is not software. Or if it is software, you're in the wrong business.
Why we sold our waste brokerage company a couple of years ago. We said we're better at this thing than we are at that thing. So let's go do the software side.
Perfect example.
I would think that homegrown stuff is looked at as like integration costs and migrate. Like I would actually deduct if I were on the buying side of some of those, because it feels risky. Like who's maintaining it? How do I get through that transition period? Because they've got something they probably want to
Matt's
migrate
point, there's
towards.
a lot of process in that homegrown stuff that they might have codified that is not industry standard, and now you're dealing with a nightmare.
Buried in a controller file somewhere, right?
Let me give
you got
Can I give two quick examples based on my real experience? So when I was leading M&A at RTS a few years ago, we made two larger acquisitions for that platform, and a few others on top of that. But the larger ones, first one was Elitis, based in Columbus, Ohio, a waste broker, but a little bit different than RTS. They had an in-house software system that we actually wanted. And I placed value on that in my assessment of the company and valuation of the company. And it was a platform that we wanted, and we wanted to integrate it into the RTS system. I don't know what the status of that is today, but I would expect that at least some remnants of that are still around, or it may have merged in some ways or whatever, right? But it was valuable to us. When we acquired Recycle Smart, based out of Vancouver, Canada, now they had a hardware platform called Pello, which is around waste sensors and bin sensors. And we place a lot of value on that. But on the software side, they're in the middle of sort of revamping their internal system to be sort of a semi-custom or customized EPR. And we just said, hey guys, stop. If this goes through, when this goes through, we're not going to want to do any of that. So just don't even continue to spend money on that. And that was so that's where the software side, we did not have value because we had basically redundancy on our side that we didn't want to mess with, right?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of standardization that is yet to come in this industry.
Right. Absolutely. You don't need a custom solution for everything, and almost certainly you probably don't need a custom solution except in very few circumstances.
So Matt, we'll see you in a few months at this event, right?
That's right. Absolutely.
In the meantime, if they want to ask you what's the multiple on their company, where do they find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Matt Hillin, Hillin. I think the LinkedIn URL is pretty easy, linkedin.com/in/Hillin. And then you can also email me, mhillin@lakeside-acquisitions.com. And I'd be happy to chat with anyone in the industry, whether you're looking to sell or buy or just want, a friendly chat.
Yeah, Matt, I've had a lot of conversations with Matt over the years on the side of just, what do you think about that deal going by? And it's always pretty interesting to hear his take on it from a guy who's in the numbers on a routine basis, different than, I am looking at it from the outside. And it's always insightful to go, oh, okay, I didn't think about that. It's an interesting little wiggle. Okay. And you do have a lot of insight from all the experience you've had. I mean, we didn't really cover your history too much, but you started inside Waste Management's operation, but before that you were at MIT, right?
It's been a journey to get to where I am, and I can't say it was planned out in any real way. But yes, I have a civil engineering degree from MIT. Hardest 4 years of my life, and it probably will be for throughout my life. I did spend several years as an actual civil and construction engineer, almost turning wrenches in the field, things like that for the oil and gas industry. Several years then after doing an MBA in investment banking for oil and gas. And then after that, I thought, well, what's next? And frankly, I saw a job posting for corporate development and M&A at Waste Management. And I applied and I got the offer, and that started the waste journey a number of years ago now.
That was not on the bingo card at senior year of high school, was it? Going that route.
Honestly, probably never even thought about trash when I was that young, right? It just so you put it out on your driveway, and it
Goes
just sort of
away.
appears, right? And what happens to it? No one knows.
Well, thank you, Matt, for joining us. Appreciate it. We should do a wrap up, Charlie. You want to exit us out?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Matt, again for coming along and talking with us today. As Brian mentioned, our quick plug for Waste Nexus. We call it Where the Waste World Connects. A event that we host here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, September 15th and 16th this year.
Matt's coming.
Matt's coming. He's a repeat offender. And a really great group of people that have applied, and you might have seen some of the acceptances and stuff which are rolling on LinkedIn get announced. So take a look at that. It's at dsqtechnology.com/waste nexus, or thankfully it's the top hit on Google. So you can check that out too, and get to hang out with folks like Matt and avoid folks like Brian and I. So thanks again, Matt, for coming along and chatting with us today. I hope you have a good rest of the day.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. It's been a pleasure.